Hey, welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC out of Indianapolis. We're joined by the one, the only Josh Hammer. You know him from Newsweek. You know him from his various places that he appears on media all the dang time. And we link all of that stuff down in the bio. But what you do not know him from is his hatred of the nonsense that has gripped the left for the anti-Semitism that is not just tongue-in-cheek anymore. I mean, it's just right out there in the open. And this is where I would tee up something for you to just like go off on, but there are literally too many examples to choose from. So maybe give us a bit of a summary about what's going on maybe right now with the left and their love for hating the Jews.
Tony, great to join you as always. So, I mean, it's hard to know how far to go back to identify a clear trend here. I mean, certainly the rise of the Barack Obama presidency and the 2008 intersectional DEI coalition, essentially the coalition of the aggrieved interests, as I like to call it sometimes, that definitely expedited things. The Obama administration obviously had a visceral loathing of the state of Israel. They were trying to mollycoddle to Iran, trying to inverse essentially a half century of U.S. foreign policy. So that was a big step. But, Ilhan Omar and the rise of the squad was kind of the next big step. And, when I was kind of a younger, up-and-coming conservative blogger and writer, to me, one of the big crossings of the Rubicon happened around February to March of 2019. So the squad comes into power, Ilhan Omar, AOC, they get in there in the November 2018 midterms. They're freshmen starting January 2019. It was February 2019 that Ilhan Omar has the infamous the Benjamins comments, talking about AIPAC and whatnot there. And the House of Representatives, Tony, I'm sure that you'll recall this, they tried initially to get a House resolution to condemn anti-Semitism in light of those comments. They couldn't even do it. They had to water it down to just be this kind of broad, amorphous, vague condemnation of any bigotry under the sun.
Bad things are bad. Ah, yes, bold statements here only, of course.
Exactly. I mean, and they threw in homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia. How about a clear, nice, succinct condemnation of the world's oldest bigotry, which, oh, by the way, one of your newest members at the time, Ilhan Omar, has just been trafficking in, and she's been doing it ever since then, honestly. Look, if there's any silver lining to this deeply, deeply unpleasant and disturbing trend on the left, Tony, if there's any silver lining, and to be clear, it's hard to find silver linings at a time when people like Josh Shapiro are very clearly being tossed aside for Kamala's running mate, not necessarily because he is quote unquote pro-Israel. By the way, I hear this, I push back. Josh Shapiro, from what I can tell, has the exact same stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as any generic Democrat out there. It's not that he is pro-Israel. It's that his name is literally Josh Shapiro. It's that he has a very stereotypically Jewish-sounding last name. I mean, it's literally like me, Josh Hammer, Ben Shapiro. You get Josh Shapiro. That's like as Jewy as it gets, right? So, I mean, that should be disgusting. But if there's any silver lining out there, here's what I can say. Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush have now gone down in flames in their congressional primaries in New York City and St. Louis, respectively. Now, it took a lot of outside money to make that happen there. But those are definitely silver linings to point to. Unfortunately, Ilhan Omar did not go down in flames earlier this week. But look, I'm trying to look for something to kind of latch onto here,
Right. No, and I understand that. And there is, I do want to look for that silver lining. And I thought that I was hoping, I'll put it that way. I didn't think I was hoping that with the demise of Bowman, of Bush in their primaries, that maybe we were starting to come out of this phase, that hopefully it was just a phase. But Kamala Harris picking Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar, regaining or being reelected in this particular primary to be up on the ballot again in November, it is a sign of something that is not quite through yet. And is still growing in the Democrat Party. And especially with the individuals that Walz has associated himself with, as someone who has actually seen the greatest story never told, that pro-Hitler documentary, that Walz would have brought someone who lauded that film as something amazing, that awful garbage rhetoric, an actual neo-Nazi defender, as someone that he thought was an important Muslim voice in the community. It really does not. There's been kind of a playing both sides of the fence with the Democrat Party for a long time. This seems like such open catering to anti-Semitism at this point. I mean, we're not even at dog whistles at this point. We're at full on like hosting walk in the dog park open public events. That's how wild has begun to appear.
Well, Tim Walz himself is something of a political chameleon, right? Because when he first got into Congress, I think he joined in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. There,
Mhm.
he joined in a red leaning, Republican leaning district. So back then, he espoused bipartisan ish talking points. I mean, back
Right.
then, I think he was actually even NRA endorsed at one point when it comes to the Israel issue. He spoke at APAC one year. He issued all of the correct platitudes. But then, as soon as he got into the governor's mansion, and it was right around the same time that Ilhan Omar was elected to Congress, he started putting in one of the most transformative left wing agendas that any governor has probably ever had. He has absolutely warmed up to Ilhan Omar. He has warmed up to many radical imams there from the predominantly Somali community there in Minneapolis. There, and do you know what's probably the single most disturbing thing about Tim Walz to
Tell
me,
me.
Tony? There's a lot to unpack here. I mean, the dude like literally honeymooned in communist China. I mean, he's done a lot of crazy stuff. The Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots. To me, probably the single most appalling thing that Tim Walz, who I think studied so-called genocide studies in university at some point, which by the way, I didn't know that was a thing. But for him to quote unquote study that and then to arrive at what I'm about to say is just next level. What Tim Walz has said about the Holocaust in particular. He says the Holocaust should not be taught to youngsters and students as a unique historical event, but rather in the broader context of other genocides committed in human history. To which I say, and here I'm going to get a bit of a prop for you here, if I can do so. Here is a rock that a rabbi gave to me in Jerusalem years ago. This is from the crematorium at Auschwitz. This is what this rock is that I'm holding to you for the viewers to look at is from. I keep this right here on my desk next to me at all times to kind of ground me throughout the day and ultimately kind of remind me of who I am and what I'm ultimately fighting for and by extension fighting against. For Tim Walz to get on his high horse there and say that the systemic extermination of 6 million Jews by what was at that time the world's most advanced industrial country, the most philosophically, mathematically advanced country, culturally, musically. It was Germany. It was the epicenter of it all. For him to say that that is not a unique historical event is a loathsome and disgusting middle finger, not merely to the Jewish people, but for all of the Jewish people's friends, primarily Christians, of course, across America and across the world. It is a disgusting statement from Tim Walz.
So as an educator and of course, as a Christian, I find such an idea that he would frame it in that way abhorrent. But as an educator, one of the reasons that particularly upset me it was because he makes that out to seem as though he's the scientist standing and keeping a sterile view of history. This idea that he can say, well, this goes with the genocides, this goes with like he's sorting Lego blocks by color. And the issue is that that's not how that works. It's not. It is not at all how that functions, because what you are doing by isolating that kind of an event and basically whitewashing it to say, oh, it's just as bad as how the United States during Manifest Destiny conquered the Native Americans, or it's just as bad as how for example, the Australians colonized over the Aborigines. That when you equate those two, what you do is you make your entire case to be anti-imperialism, and before long, you start to get Jews have always been mostly associated with colonial powers, so maybe, this was actually kind of some type of a retribution that they kind of deserved. That is where that type of academic equationing rests, that academic equating, excuse me. And that's why I find it most abhorrent, because what you do is, it's like he's writing some kind of a thesis against the West, where it's like, well, all genocides are perpetrated by white people. And it's no. Genocides happen for a lot of different reasons. The Holocaust was a uniquely anti-Semitic from the world's oldest kind of racism, the most vitriolic kind of hate for God's people. That's what it is. And he makes him sound like he's some type of academic by, framing this as a sterile, just another genocide. But in reality, it's the same kind of cultural Marxist garbage that has been whitewashing atrocities throughout human history.
Yeah, I think the point is very well taken, and it's very well said. It does definitely fit into this broader kind of anti-Western civilization, mentality. Again, and as I said earlier, this is someone who literally honeymooned in communist China. Who
he really is Bernie Sanders' true successor. I mean, good Lord. honeymooning in the CCP. It's not Moscow, so I guess he's on the other side of the Sino-Soviet split. But goodness gracious.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Bernie famously honeymooned in the Soviet Union, so it's more or less the same thing we're dealing with here. But look, I mean, could the Democrats, getting back to how we started our conversation, could the
Absolutely.
Democrats have possibly sent a clearer message to Jewish voters in simultaneously passing over Josh Shapiro? Again, not because he is quote unquote pro-Israel. Honestly, from my perspective, I don't even know if he qualifies based on his actual stances, honestly. I guess he's vaguely pro-Israel, whatever that even means. But the point is he's literally Jewish, and that is clearly, unambiguously why he was passed over there. He had to do this whole song and dance routine to disavow this op-ed he wrote when he was 20 years old at the University of Rochester, which, by the way, was actually a much more clear-eyed op-ed on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict than his current views today. But
Correct.
simultaneously passing over him and then going for this dude, Tim Walz, the prairie socialist, the overweight Bernie Sanders, if you will, the guy who was literally saying that the Holocaust must be taught in the context there. I mean, what an absolute middle finger to Jewish Democrats out there. And, anecdotally, Tony, I can tell you that every person in my extended family who is not as conservative as I am, who is a centrist, center left, or so forth there, down the line, they're all voting or planning to vote for Donald Trump this November. I mean, anecdotally, we'll see how the exit polls actually do. But, we're starting to see some polls of the American Jewish vote. I think the shift is actually in the works. And I never count my chickens before I hatch on this issue in particular. But I think a trend is actually starting to form, God willing.
Your lips to God's ears. And that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that we can actually start to see a broad coalition movement that actually enshrines making sure that a cultural reverence for Judeo-Christian values is something that is held sacrosanct in this country yet again. Josh Hammer, he's the senior editor-at-large at Newsweek. Of course, he's also the host of the Josh Hammer Show and America on Trial at First on TV. You want to check out the First and check out his show there. It's good stuff. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Tony. Thank you.